I mentioned this on Friday's episode of Locked On Kraken, but here's why I like the gold plan and why I would love if the gold plan was instituted by the NHL this season. I feel like it'd make the Seattle Kraken much easier to watch for the remainder of the season.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erica L. Ayala. I am a contributor to CBS Sports, and as many of you know, have been a longtime contributor to women's hockey on the broadcast, as an analyst, with the professional hockey, or with the Premier Hockey Federation, And now, of course, we have the PWHL. And as I mentioned in the open, if you listen to Locked On NHL on Friday, we had our women's hockey spotlight, and we talked about the gold plan. I think I kept calling it the golden rule. But either way, the gold plan, named after the gentleman who came up with it, is an innovative idea to effectively end tanking. And I want to read this from the PWHL presser on their playoff plans. The gold plan, proposed in the late 2000s by statistician Adam Gold, the gold plan, also known as draft order of selection by mathematical elimination. Yeah, the gold plan is much easier to say. The PWHL's adaptation of the system rewards team success upon elimination from playoff contention. Once a team is mathematically eliminated from the playoff, it begins earning draft order points. I'm using air quotes for those not watching on YouTube. In all subsequent games, including all regular season games that begin following a team's elimination, using the league's standard point system that awards 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an overtime or shootout win, and 1 point for an overtime or shootout loss, and 0 points for a regulation loss. The team with the most draft order points at the conclusion of the regular season will earn the first selection in each round of the draft. The non-playoff team with the fewest draft order points will select second in each round of the draft. And then it goes on to talk about tiebreakers. So why am I talking about what the PWHL is doing on the Locked On Podcast Network? Because season 1, we didn't really have to worry about tanking. The season was a tough one, right? This season, as we really teeter finally on the line between being a playoff contender and not being a playoff contender, I'm seeing all over social media, even in some of the comments, that the Seattle Kraken should tank. And here's the thing. When the Seattle Kraken lose to the Arizona Coyotes in overtime, I start wondering, how much is this tanking thing for real? I have always defended athletes. I'm like, there is no way someone is going to tank just to get, hopefully, a top draft pick. But when you see how the Seattle Kraken played against the Arizona Coyotes, I have to start asking questions. There's nothing in my bones that thought that we would lose this game. Would it be competitive? Sure. And that's not a slight on Arizona. But I thought that we would play for pride. I thought that Joey Decord would have a bounce back game. I really thought that we were a serious team. In my opinion, you are an unserious team, and I don't trust overall your work ethic or your competitive edge if you are buying into tanking. Now, whether this is something that the players are doing on their own, whether this is something, a directive, I'm not talking about the Seattle Kraken, I'm just talking generally speaking. As an athlete, former, there is nothing outside of just a mental, just an evacuation of my mentality that would make me lose a game on purpose. You literally train to not do that. Athletes are trained since the beginning of time to win games by any means necessary. So on a psychological level, I have a difficult time with this idea of tanking. And yeah, the idea of tanking seems to come from fan bases, but I do wonder, do professional sports teams really have conversations about tanking? So you're okay with playing mediocre in an effort to potentially bring in a top prospect to what appears to be a crap show. That's so wild to me on so many levels. I've never understood the idea of tanking. And now here we are. I'm covering the Seattle Kraken and seeing all of this fodder about tanking. And it grinds my grits. It burns my grits. It grinds my gears. I cannot stand it, quite honestly. I understand it. I'm conscious of the idea and the mentality and the quote unquote strategy. I think it is disrespectful, quite honestly, to competitive sports. I really do. I really, really do. So, and the Seattle Kraken are in a situation where I don't know how many times I can talk about defensive breakdowns. I don't know how many times I can talk about high quality shots. JT Brown did a great job on yesterday's broadcast breaking down the decision making of the Seattle Kraken. At times, they're not playing direct enough and they pull out. And at other times, when they should pull out and use the width of use the width of the ice, they're not doing that. So I don't know. I mean, am I reading too much into the tea leaves here? Are we a team that's trying to tank, or are we just a team that's bad at decision making? I don't know. Maybe they're the same. Either way, it's frustrating to watch. So I don't know if this gold, plan would make a difference. But I'm willing to try something. The Score wrote an article 3 years ago. The gold plan, is the gold plan a golden concept? And revisited the idea, making a case for the gold plan. Some people saying, well, if you start the clock at the time of mathematical elimination, which the Seattle Kraken have not reached yet, does that mean that the team, I don't know, just hypothetically speaking, like the Seattle Kraken, tries to reach mathematical elimination earlier so that they have more games to tank? They pre-tank their elimination so that they get to elimination sooner so that they can start winning on the other side. I mean, the argument in the article is, well, teams that are in that boat, they're not going to win a lot of hockey games, in this case, hockey games, because they're not a good team. Well, I mean, the Arizona Coyotes are a struggling team. The Chicago Blackhawks are a struggling team. The San Jose Sharks are a struggling team. And I'm pretty sure we've lost to all of them in this season. So what does that say about Seattle? And I like what's said in the article. And I guess Gold himself said this. I let me see if I can find. I scrolled away now. But effectively he was saying, one, that you would need certain tweaking to the gold plan, and you could experiment. We just haven't seen experimentation. But if I put on my tinfoil hat just for a moment, come in close. If I put on my tinfoil hat for a moment, I wonder if the PWHL, because they have such a direct relationship, more direct than we've seen in years past with women's professional hockey, I wonder if they're going to be like the WNBA is to the NBA. So the NBA, for those who don't know, did an in-season tournament, and it was all the rave. There was all this money put into it. They had this big marketing campaign with Michael Imperioli, doing this Vegas style, commercial. And everyone was like, how is this going to work? What is this? How do we, they had different floor layouts and concepts. And I found it hysterical that there were grown people who say they are basketball fans who thought that this came out of nowhere and hadn't been tested for 3 seasons in the WNBA. I could have had a lot of their questions answered by if they just watched the WNBA. Anyway, I digress. Getting off my soapbox. But what if the PWHL is testing out the Gold plan because they want to do some of this testing that Gold himself talks about? Quote, if you want to fully resolve the tanking and you want to get rid of any incentive to lose, it's hard to do it in a way where everyone is going to agree on the best strategy right off the bat without it being tested. So is the PWHL the test? Are they the guinea pig for this? A la the WNBA and their Commissioner's Cup, which then after several seasons of seeing how it worked in the WNBA was implemented, and with a lot more money, mind you, by the NBA. Could that be what's happening? But again, I wanted to go back to what Gold himself says about the idea of kind of quote unquote pre-tanking. I believe in a pro sports league, there should be an expectation that any team can win any game. Otherwise, don't expect fans to pay. I agree. I would add to what Gold said that there is an expectation that any team is going to go out and do their best to win. And then to quote Gold again, otherwise, don't expect fans to pay to stay and to support you. Why would I support a team that is actively trying to lose? Oh, okay, because you want the next Connor Bedard, yada, yada, yada. I find this fascinating because not every number one pick is a guarantee. Not every round one pick is a guarantee. It is a toss-up. It's like, playing a slot machine, playing craps. Yes, of course, the probability is high in certain areas, but it also depends on outside factors that are not the player themselves, including how well your organization is suited to develop young talent. And there are times where you might have the best development, but you don't have a coach that can coach young talent or is willing to integrate young talent in a way where, at times they're going to make mistakes. They have to learn on the fly. There's so many different factors. I find this fascinating, honestly. We'll probably talk about this whenever the Seattle Kraken are officially mathematically eliminated. But I just thought this was so interesting. I wanted to come on here on Saturday and talk about it because, again, the Seattle Kraken lose another winnable game. You don't have to hear me talk about it. That's what Dave Haxtell said. It's frustrating, a winnable game. The Seattle Kraken shots on goal 28-26. We see that Joey Daccord did get the start. I talked about that on yesterday's episode. I assumed he would, not just because it was a back-to-back, but also because he was back in Arizona. It wasn't as lucky as the last time, but he made 24 of 26 saves, a .923 save percentage. So, we don't put this on Joey Daccord at all. The Coyotes, they just played a better game. And there's something else that I want to talk about. A .964 save percentage on Arizona's side. But I want to talk about something else because I thought... also going back to women's hockey, I mentioned the Premier Hockey Federation. When I covered the last PHF Isabel Cup Championship in Arizona at Mullet Arena, as a matter of fact, the Toronto Six were playing the Minnesota Whitecaps. And I got to go to practices for both teams, but I spent, just with how the schedule worked out, I was able to spend more time at the Toronto Six practice. And they practice overtime, 3-on-3 situations. And what was interesting to me is that the coaching staff was focused mostly on their defenders, the defense core. And sure, you want to see what people are going to do on the breakout and da-da-da-da-da. But more so, Geraldine Heaney, Hockey Hall of Famer, was really laser sharp focused on her defense because the defenders are the people that would rotate on the ice for a tired skater. It was almost always a defender. And I found that interesting. Now, I'm not saying you always have to have a defender rotate in, but that's just how Heaney liked to do it. I think sometimes they'd have multiple defenders out there. Anyway, and I was observing this, and then I asked Geraldine Heaney, I asked the players, what is the value of focusing on the transitions onto the ice? I think I asked Soroya Tinker, Carly Jackson, and probably Emma Woods. And I have some of this over on Black Rosie Media, I think particularly on our Patreon page. But I was interested, why focus on that? Why is that so important? And the rationale, I think Soroya Tinker talked about it the most because she's now retired, but works with the PWHL. She talked about you have to get that timing and that transition right. Because if you don't, you run the risk of, when you do have the puck, not being aggressive enough. Maybe your forwards don't want to take that chance. They don't feel that they have security. If they go for it and for whatever reason they get knocked off the puck, they miss, whatever the case is, that then there's going to be someone back. And that's, the other side of the coin is that if the other team is able to make a defensive stop, you need someone that's rotating. And I found that so interesting, spending the time in practice. And mind you, the last ever PHF Isabel Cup championship did go to overtime. And the Toronto Six did win because of an aggressive forecheck by Teresa Vanishova. And she was able to beat the goaltender. But it came from a defensive play by a forward to win the championship. And why am I saying this on Locked On Kraken? Because this is the second overtime game, and multiple games just in general, whether they went to overtime or not, where I have heard Dave Haxtell post-game talk about poor transitions, poor rotations, poor line changes for the Seattle Kraken. For those listening on audio, that pause is me blinking my eyes in utter frustration, because you know that I respect, appreciate, and want to see more practice. And these are the things that you have to practice before you find yourselves in a situation where you're unprepared to handle them. And the fact that multiple times this season, the Seattle Kraken and the head coach has admitted that they lack the ability or are falling short because of line changes. Those are things that you cannot always predict. You don't know what other teams are going to do. It's 3-on-3. Wild things happen. People slip on the ice. Who knows? You take a block and then it's tough to get back to the bench. You can't game plan for every scenario, but that's the whole point of practice, is that you get yourself, and good practices are about throwing scenarios at your team so that they in real time are building the muscle memory to problem solve on the fly. The best teams are teams in any sport. The best teams are teams that when something isn't going to plan, they can look at each other without audibly speaking and anticipate what their teammate is thinking and where they want them to be. I have heard from multiple athletes in my time as a journalist that they built something in a huddle. They saw something from the other team that they had an instinct was going to nullify what they drew up in the huddle, because, oh yeah, the other team, if they're doing their job, has also scouted your plays. So now you have to know your playbook. You have to know your personnel and your teammates good enough to be able to just, do you see what I see? Okay, good. Then change on the fly. I don't get the sense that the Seattle Kraken have that. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I talked about Eberle and his comments about confidence. I personally, from my vantage point, think that it is at least in part because of a lack of time on ice together in practice going through these scenarios. I'm so frustrated. I'm so frustrated because these seem to be solvable issues and they're not being solved. And I don't want to put this all on Dave Haxtell. I have already told you my 2 cents about where the front office needs to up their game, but also some of this is the players. And having to make a commitment to do things the right way because they yield results. And we're not seeing results from the Seattle Kraken. And it's unfortunate because, I have to sit here and do this episode and we're missing out on being able to celebrate Riker Evans and his first NHL goal. He got his first pro goal, not his first pro point, but he got his first pro goal. So before we close out this Saturday episode, let's hear from Riker about getting that goal, the lone goal in the Seattle Kraken's 2-1 overtime loss to the Arizona Coyotes.
But just what was the feeling when you saw that puck go in the back of the net, your first NHL goal?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Obviously, it took a little bit, but it was good to get the first one out of the way and keep pushing and helping the team to win here coming up. I think Schwartzy had it behind the net, and then Canner made a great pass across, and I think the goalie was way out of the crease, so had a wide open net.
What did Jared say to you after that? It looked like he was just as fired up for you as you were.
Oh, yeah, he's been awesome with helping my confidence, so it was awesome to see how happy he was for me. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is just kind of taking everything in, just absorbing as much as I can, learn from these older guys, and then adding some of the stuff to my game, and then hopefully the confidence keeps building and I can play my way. It's just like little things like taking care of yourself off the ice, but I think most of it is like managing the game, how the older guys manage the game, just watching how they do that.
So there's Riker Evans. Again, congratulations to Riker. He got his first professional NHL goal. Hoping there is more to come. He talks about, it took a little bit. And I've been talking about Ty Cartier. I think he's definitely trying things. I hope that this means that Riker is going to be more empowered to really step up. And at this point, we'll take offense from anywhere. I mean, it's an anemic offense. It has been all season. But I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mentioned the gold plan. And I also mentioned maybe the PWHL being a testing zone for the NHL. I think that's very interesting. We're going to talk about that more on Locked On NHL and our Women's Hockey Spotlight. But also, this team, what do you think about them being prepared for situations and scenarios? We talked about also 6-on-5, I think, last year, and they got better at that once. They started practicing. Faceoffs were a big emphasis early in the season, and that seemed to die out. And I think you can see that in our numbers. So where is the leadership coming from? Oh, sorry, my curls are getting out of formation. Anyway, where is the leadership coming from? And are the Seattle Kraken focused on the right things? I know some of you are actively saying you want tanking. I actively want the gold plan because this is insufferable for me as a competitor to watch teams, whether they're doing it on purpose or not play to their full potential. I thought the point was to win a Stanley Cup. Maybe try working hard to do that. Because even if you tank, even if you get a first round pick, that's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed that you're going to win. You still have to put in the work to win. That's it. Period. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. I will have a game day episode for you. The Seattle Kraken hosting Montreal on another homestand. We're coming up on one of the last homestands. We have a little small one against Arizona and San Jose. Hopefully we'll win those. And then we end the season on the road. Where will the Seattle Kraken be at that point in time? I guess we'll have to watch the games to find out. But here's hoping they find their competitive edge. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. Pump up this Seattle Kraken team. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.